Morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you go away with some thoughts and perhaps some ideas of things that you might want to explore. But of course, I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a doctor, but I am in a very good position to be hosting this particular topic because my own personal neurodiversity and also my professional experience has exposed me to lots of situations around autism, around neurodiversity, ADHD, and indeed eating habits. And not least the fact that we're going to talk a little bit later about why this occurs sometimes, but I'm one of those people that falls into the category of I literally forget to eat. And sometimes if I didn't have a partner who was actually messaging me and saying, oh, what do you have for dinner tonight? When he's away for a period of time, I may be found in a heap somewhere having not eaten. So we'll look at why that is a little bit later on. And we're also going to look at how we can just decode some of these references that we hear, particularly more so these days. I think some have been around a long time. Certainly PICA is something that when I first started in the world of autism some 30 plus years ago, it was very sort of well understood and talked about, and we'll come back to all of these in a moment. But then there's things like neophobia and ARFID, and all kind of looking at those in relation to autism is what we're going to be doing this morning. So I'm not, as I say, a dietitian in a position to kind of decode or diagnose or work through those specific elements of eating situations that you might find yourself in. But I'm certainly in a good position to share some hopefully helpful stories and information and experiences. And of course, one of the main areas of understanding eating is thinking about that emotional, physical, and sensory triggers that are relative to our children who have a diagnosis of autism. So we're going to be exploring some really sort of autism-friendly hints and tips that other families have discovered have worked for them, that might be really kind of outside the box. I've got one or two stories that, shocked me over the years in my practice and made me sort of step back from what you think, And I think that's why, confident professionals are open to constant learning. And that's what I like to think is my certain situation. Constantly learning from the families I have the privilege to share journeys with. So hopefully this morning, some of those journeys will be helpful to you. Now, the first thing we're going to just look at is actually this particular word, habits, because I think there's a danger when we think of habit that we dismiss it as something that someone's chosen to do. And when you think really, in essence, habits are formed through repetition, and then they become automatic behaviors. And some characteristics of eating and autism may appear to be habits, but actually what we want to be doing is thinking of the importance and being mindful of the fact that actually for our children in particular, there's likely some underlying triggers, and these may be less usual than those identified with a pure eating label or diagnosis. So we need to be really mindful and careful of that. I've had a lot of experience of women, particularly, and young girls who have had a diagnosis of perhaps anorexia or something like that. And actually, I am not challenging those diagnoses that are out there. Please, be clear on that. But what I am saying is that we need to also be very mindful of the autism element that's threading through some of those diagnoses. I know there's a number of books out there where women refer to the fact that their early diagnosis was perhaps to do with eating and not a whole umbrella assessment around autism, and that came much later. So it's just that whole thing really of stirring up our thinking. So I'm not challenging dietitians, but I am saying we need to stir up our thinking in terms of where is the autism kind of weaving into these experiences. And so some situations may be established very early on and they may evolve into a habit. But for many young autistic people, repetitive behaviours bring a sense of calm. And food is such an emotive area, an emotive arena, that I've worked with many families who daren't change something because of fear of stopping their child from eating that one thing that they seem to eat. And I think, that does sort of happen quite frequently, really. And I love the fact that there are, some fabulous supports out there about habits and how we can manage habits. And there's one here, James Clear wrote. It's not an autism specific book at all, but it talks about the importance of changing habits in tiny, weeny steps. And I think for our children, that's a really particularly relevant thing to bear in mind. That if we do want to change what's happening or we want to change our experiences, we need to do that in tiny, weeny steps. And James Clear kind of refers to things as almost changing things by the second. And I think, for our children, changing them by the P. So, having one P on a sharing plate in the middle of the table rather than a whole load of overwhelming food might be a way of thinking about introducing new concepts or new foods and not actually invading their plate or their space with it. And we will come back to that, but I think before we sort of head there, thinking about what we can and perhaps can't alter, we're going to just have a look at some of the terminology that's out there. So we know that there's lots of terms out there that perhaps we've heard and we understand. Like we might have heard of social anxiety, where children or adults even have a lot of anxiety around eating in front of others, and that has this posh name of neophobia. And so that might be something that's getting in the way of eating for our children. That worry about their social environment can perhaps be impacting. So that's something that we need to be very mindful of as well. When we think about that food neophobia, that fear of new foods, that desire for sameness comes into play there. So is it a genuine fear of new foods, as in the diagnosis of neophobia, or is it lots to do with our autism and our desire for sameness? And I think one of the ways that we can sort of look at that, and the only reason really, or the value in us looking at it, is so that it helps us to be brave enough. We've talked about Brené Brown in the past and how, her encouragement to, are we brave enough? And sometimes I think as parents, that's the danger, isn't it? It is, are we brave enough? I know a situation arose in my own experience a little while ago, and a little boy's granddad was thinking he was helping his grandson get ready for school, and he started to help him cut his sandwich, and unfortunately he actually cut the sandwich, and this particular little boy likes to leave his sandwich whole. And so when granddad cut his sandwich, this didn't just mean that we could make another sandwich and that could go in the box. This threw the whole preparation of school lunch bag off kilter. This particular little boy had to unpack everything, put everything back in the fridge, put his lunchbox back in the cupboard, and start that whole process again. Because for him, that whole system, that consistency, that desire for sameness was so profound that that was enough to throw him off kilter. And actually, he would have rather have gone to school with no lunch and had no lunch than be able to cope with that whole situation of having a cut sandwich. And I think that's the kind of relevance that I'm talking about when I'm saying we need to be really mindful and really thinking of where is autism playing a part in our whole experience of food and eating and dining. And of course, ARFID is something that it is becoming more and more talked about and understood, that avoidance of restrictive food intake disorder. Again, it can be a diagnosis on its own, or it can be part and parcel of our autism experience. And that means that for some people, they may have very strong negative reactions to certain foods, textures, colours, smells, or tastes. And that's now recognised as that restrictive food intake disorder. But obviously, it's really important that we don't dismiss those. And this is the most like cursory overview of those particular experiences and situations. So I've referenced all of them at the end. And it's really important that, you know, if we do feel that that's what's happening for our children, that we seek advice from those particular support arenas and organisations. And then thinking about PICA, but lots of experience of children with PICA who are going around eating sort of the stones in the garden or whatever they can get their hands on. So that persistent eating of non-food items. And that's now classed as an eating disorder, just as ARFID is now recognised as an eating disorder in the diagnostic manuals. So that's an important shift in understanding some of these relative eating situations that can also arise along with autism. And then this hyperphagia, where actually that extreme hunger, that not knowing when you're full, that insatiable appetite. And so we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail this morning. And I think when we look traditionally at these, some of these are managed and supported by cognitive behaviour therapy, which is encouraging people to think about and identify specific fears. Now, for children with autism, that might need a different way of working. We might need a different focus, because sometimes for our children, their experience of revisiting something is so profound that it can actually work as a barrier in them moving forwards. And it may be that they've got something else going on as well, along with these particular references that we're talking about. So for one little boy, for him, his real situation was misophonia, which is that real difficulty in coping with the noise of other people eating. And that whole experience of, you know, that could be diagnosed as diapnophobia, but actually for him, it wasn't. It was the misophonia. It was the crunching and the clearing of throats and the swallowing of food that he found really difficult. So it might be that actually when we're thinking about restricted foods and those labels, that our children will only eat anything that's beige or of that certain sort of shade. And for our children, sometimes they can get so much information from their sensory system. I know one little boy who could tell when a famous crisp company changed the oil mix and they were frying their potatoes in. And mum contacted the company to ask them if they'd changed anything. And they said, you know, later on in life, they might get back to her and ask him to come as a taste tester, because he knew immediately that they'd changed their oil. And I had a family who had a PICA, and their sort of, as I say, their challenge was whenever they went in the garden or a friend's garden, they got rid of stones in their own garden, but a friend's garden where they had decorative stones, they would actually be sure to be carrying a bag of Werther's boiled mince with them. And mum said that, you know, that for them worked for them. So sometimes, as I say, just honing in on the more kind of autism perspective of what's going on. And we're going to look at how we can do that as well. And another mum who talked to me about the fact that she had to hide food. Her little boy has hyperphagia, and she has literally had to hide food in the car boot. And then she realized that actually he's a real rule keeper, her little boy. So she said if she put boxes of food in the fridge and labeled them up as someone else's, then for her, that actually worked. That helped him to know that actually that wasn't his food. And he was much more respectful of kind of what he was eating out of the fridge. So as I say, we're going to be looking at some of these thinking outside of the boxes. And I've got those 3 pictures there as a bit of a reminder visually for us that actually what we see is not always what we get with our children in particular. They're so unique and so individual, and the more we know about their general behaviors, their general reactions, responses, and interactions with their environment and with the world, then the more we can hone in on those and apply them to supporting them in their eating and health and diets and things. And the reason I put these 3 little pictures here is because I was making many years ago when I was working in an assessment nursery school, and I was working on baking, and we had teddies and various things brought in. And we were making little teddy faces out of pancakes, and we were doing a teddy bear's picnic, and there was a whole sort of theme going on, as I'm sure you can imagine. And what I found interesting was that one particular little boy didn't know which one of these he should eat. And because we've got pictures on the table of the teddies all around and things, and he genuinely did not know which one was food and which one wasn't. And it really, you know, I said at the start, I've had some moments where I've had a professional wake up, and it definitely gave me a professional wake up in terms of remembering that for our children, sometimes that discrimination, that skill of discriminating, isn't always something that is automatically applied to every situation. So he may not discriminate so well between food items and foodstuffs, and they may need more guidance and clear support in that. And a lot of this information, and certainly the percentages that I've put up there, I got from the National Library of Medicine, and someone called Gregory Wallace et al. And his pals, they've done a lot of work for the American Journal of Nutrition, Clinical Nutrition, and that was published in 2019. And the National Library of Medicine was updated in 2022. And these arenas have done a lot of research, and they are the ones that have looked at and seen these percentages that particularly are likely to occur for autistic young people. And what I found really interesting was that actually in the National Library of Medicine, they said that actually the percentage for people with autism who have some kind of eating difference or disorder, if that's how we want to term it, then that is 90%. So there's a very good reason that actually 289 of us are hopefully listening in today and thinking actually there's some relevant bits and pieces going on here. And I can see there that the chat line is busy and active, which is great, and I won't get distracted by that, but we'll certainly have a look at some of those questions a little bit later on as well. So what we can do for supporting our children in eating is pull out some of those elements that actually we've mentioned do occur in all of those food related labels that we've talked about. Now, if we pull out some of those elements, we've talked about the fact that for some of our children, focus on detail with food is an issue, that actually social anxiety can be a real impact on eating. And then we talk about this whole internalizing and interpreting. You know, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm very poor at knowing if I'm hungry or not. I can easily go all day and not eat. It does not bother me. This whole idea of, you know, doing a day's fast, absolutely fine, not a problem. And so it's completely, for me, my interoception messages about if I'm hungry or not aren't that strong. They're not that well developed, and they're not that profound. And there's all sorts of psychological theories and explanations out there, and people who are doing a lot of work currently on understanding better our interoception skills. And actually, it's part of our sensory system. So it makes sense that for many of our children, it's something that's going to be playing a relevant part to them. We may have children who are giving very strong messages about hunger, or not very strong messages about hunger. And I know one mum who told me that her son never seems to know when he's thirsty, that she has to say to him, have you had a drink? And she said, you know, he would come home from school with his water bottle as filled as when he took it, and he hadn't refilled it at school. And so they highlighted this to the teacher, and the teacher actually started doing you know, drink breaks and reminders of needing drinks. A bit like, you know, if we go to a gym class, sometimes that's what happens there. And I think for our children, sometimes we need to be connecting with those different ways of working, because those strong sensory processors change the reactions and the responses to the experiences that they're having. And that actually, when we decode that a little bit, it helps us to understand that actually it's not surprising that our children are trying to make sense of all of these feelings and experiences, or lack of. And there are occasions when we see that real persistent desire for sameness as a way of sort of calming and controlling those experiences. And I think, you know, we can't see that a child has autism, but we can experience it, and we can support those experiences. And when you think of all the things we've mentioned already, you know, we're not that far into our webinar this morning, but actually think about that sort of dining experience and all of this list. We expect our children to cope. Here we are, accepting that actually they might have a desire for sameness, they might have social anxiety around eating, there might be worries about the detail of the food. And here we are, very often in the course of a week, we could be expecting our children to dine in these styles. And each of these experiences brings on a whole new social demand, a whole new social request and social experience for our children. So we need to be thinking about how can we actually support that? How can we offer those consistencies within those experiences? And sometimes it's the food we take along. Sometimes our children, like this little boy here, create their own consistencies. You know, he lines things up, he takes one bite out of everything, and everything needs to be the same sort of colour and texture. And when we think about the fact that our hippocampus is vital to our memory, and our flavour actually can connect with parts of our brain and is tied to our emotion, it's tied to our sensory system. So everything's connected. So when we think about the fact that everything's connected, and we just hone in a moment on this desire for sameness, I'm going to just share a story about a little boy and a desire for him, the parents' desire for him not to use his bottle anymore, because it's quite a nice example of exactly this keenness on consistency. And so this little boy clearly liked his bottle, and mum had started cutting the teat off because the milk in the bottle wasn't sustaining him. And so he was 4 by now. And she was trying to get him to use something else to eat with. So she tried stopping the bottle and using a char start, using that goal-focused behaviourist style, and that didn't work. So then she tried rewarding him every time he touched or held a spoon, and that worked for a little while, but not consistently. And then she started thinking about, was there another way around this? And so we talked about maybe serving what was it that he was getting out of the bottle. And we decided it wasn't really the comfort anymore, because he wasn't really sucking it, he was really just tipping the food in. So maybe it was more around the fact that he wanted to get his food, he needed to get his food quickly. So in that context, we thought, right, we'll thicken some soups, some stews and things that we knew he liked, Weetabix in particular, and that he would be able to sip those from a cup at an alternative time of the day. So still leave the bottle in place. And so we started doing that. And lo and behold, he realized that actually he could take a drink of food as quickly as he could take the bottle. And actually, it was more convenient. And he could do that more often and in more places. So what we did there was, rather than use a goal-focused way, we looked at changing the process. And that sort of changing that process then change the mindset, and then changes the belief. And that kind of takes us back to altering the habit. And I think this is all about tuning in to every element that we're talking about: our emotions, our autism experience, our particular child, our understanding the brain connection and the gut connection, our tuning into our sensory system, and taking all of those things on board, and then approaching those processes that we want to change. And that's where Kel Maher has done lots of work and continues to on this whole interoception sense that we've talked about already. And that's about our body's response, our body's reaction, the action that's going on, and also the emotion. So making those connections. And when you think about food, we make really quick automatic connections. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to put in the chat the number that corresponds with how you felt when you saw this immediate picture. Okay. So if you can just glance, I know you're listening in sometimes on the go, as we are often busy parents, but if you are able to just glance at this slide, it will just give you a little moment to think, oh, right, well, what does this look like for me? So hopefully you've put in the chat. I'll have a quick look if I dare. I see. So yeah, lots of various responses there. And so if I then say to you, this dish is a dish of fresh caught prawns cooked in herb butter with tender slices of sous vide flat iron steak and triple cooked crispy fries, served with a rocket salad and a fresh tomato salsa. Just pop me a thumbs up if that makes you change your mind. Because sometimes I think we overlook the fact that we also eat not just with our eyes, but we eat with our ears as well. It's back to that interoception sensory processing trigger. It's back to our sensory processing triggers, really, in that actually it's our reactions and responses that are really triggering our willingness to perhaps try something new, to perhaps look at something. And isn't it interesting that actually there are some people who have changed their number rating on the information given? And how many times do we put food down in front of our children without that outside information? I know I've had great success at putting on an apron and pretending to be a waitress and taking an order from a restricted but available menu, and then preparing the food, and then serving the food with an explanation of what's being served. And I'm astounded sometimes that actually just that can change willingness to engage, to eat, to even be present. So sometimes, being playful and modeling and changing and making sure that the information that we're giving is relevant for our children as well. When we think back to those 3 pictures of those teddies and which pancake teddies should I eat, that kind of makes me mindful as well of things like this, and the rest. We put fruit bowls out. We sometimes share things, as a family, perhaps on a sharing plate. And so for our children, is that a relevant and a appropriate thing to be doing for them? And for some, it could be, because that choice and that lack of demand, just having that around, can be really helpful. But for other children, they might need more guidelines and clearer sort of pointers about the foods that they perhaps are choosing to eat. And if we've just discovered, as we have, that we eat with our eyes, and then our sort of memory and our automated knowledge is also helpful, then how do we decide if 30 plants versus 30 sweet treats versus 30 carbs versus 30 proteins is the best way forward? And then how do we differentiate between those plants? I had a situation recently where a little girl started to eat plants in school, and she had taken that literal understanding of eating 30 plants, which sometimes on our social media platforms and certainly on television adverts around food, we're exposing our children to that. And maybe it's in the background, maybe it's in the forefront. But of course, for many of our children who are literal in their thinking or literal in their decoding, that can get in the way of their eating successfully and enjoying their foods, or even participating in anything like a mealtime. I've had children where they've stopped eating altogether because one particular little boy, his auntie joked with him because he was having a large ice cream in the summer, and she said, "Oh, you're going to get fat." And he believed her, and she was just having a joke. And so, checking out how our children are actually receiving and decoding some of that media information, that and the rest that's going on out there as well. So I just want to spend the next few minutes just sharing a few success stories with you, and then I'll give you a few pointers of information that might be helpful. And then we'll take some questions. I wasn't able to view the chat line, which is probably my inadequacies, not anything to do with what's going on, but that's yeah, just how I am. If I get distracted, then we'll all be lost. So I'll try and stay on task. So success stories can be as simple as introducing a divider plate. I bet many of you online now have got children who hate different foods, touching different foods. And I would still, if I was out, I would still ask for beans to be in a little separate bowl rather than on the same plate. And those sorts of just general presentation, general situations. It might be if you like a Chinese takeaway and you like crispy lemon chicken, but you don't want the sauce over. It's often the same for our children, and we've usually sort of observed that. But again, it's just making sure that we're facilitating that as our children get older, and okaying it and giving permission for that. And lots of success with keeping separate food separate on a plate. And many years ago, talking about separate food, I worked with a family whose little boy ended up in hospital being tube fed. And I don't want to alarm anyone or scare anyone, but it is important that if you have got real serious concerns, that you do see GP and you do get specialist help in supporting you through that. But this little boy was a real anomaly, and we had tried everything. There was a whole arena of autism trained professionals and other service professionals as well, the hospital, the pediatrician, the dietitian, and everyone was drawing a blank. We just couldn't nail or work out what it was that was the real root of what was going on for this little boy. And one day, and he was a little boy of a family of, I think, 3 or 4, and we, as I say, we were baffled. And this particular day, his dad had taken him to the newsagents with him, and his dad picked up his little boy picked up out of the fridge a pasta pot. And the dad said he was really surprised by this because they were a real sort of meat and 2 veg Yorkshire family, and even, you know, a posh pasta pot wouldn't be something that would be in the house. But he said, obviously, with the situation, the way it was with their little boy and him eating, that he bought it and thought, you know, fine, we'll take it home. Anyway, to cut what was a very long story and a very long time working on it short, what they discovered was that their little boy would eat anything that wasn't the same as what everybody else was eating. And this was a family who, you know, made a family dinner, and that was what went on the table, and everybody ate it. And, you know, they did a big cottage pie or a big lasagna or whatever. And they weren't sort of cooking individually for everybody. And they discovered that actually, if they kept the food from the night before for the next day for this little boy, then say they were having shepherd's pie that night, he would eat the lasagna from the night before. Now, that was another professional, oh my goodness me, because what it turned out to be was that actually this little boy was in a house of lots of little brothers, older and one younger. And they were always saying to him, that's mine, get off, can't have that, that's mine. And so he had presumed in his own little mind, he's decoding, making sense of his environment, that all the food that was out was for everybody else and not for him. And it's really interesting, isn't it, when we do actually understand. And genuinely, that was the recovery for that little boy, which is just astounding, isn't it? And not surprising that it's remained in my head for well over 25 years. So moving on to the next little picture, gum. So thinking about gum, you know, everybody kind of has a bit of a thing about, oh, should we let our children have gum or should we not? But actually, I know children that have had a lot of success with chewing gum as a bit of a distraction and sort of clearing their taste buds and things like that. So again, you know, let's try and be flexible. I think that's the important thing. I know children who've had success with ear defenders at the table, but again, it can't always be ideal, because if they're chewing themselves, it can actually exacerbate the noise that they're trying to diminish. So explore, see if there's just some ear putty or something like that that perhaps works better for meal times. I used to have a little packet and it just had munch mufflers on it, and it sits in the cookery drawer, and that's just got some of those pliable sort of ear wax things that they sell for travel and for swimming and things. I've had great success of children sitting at the table just literally by putting a gym band around the chair legs, because that was the issue for them, that actually the food wasn't engaging enough and keeping them attended, but actually they needed some movement at the table. Had great success with a simple symbol like this, saying that's okay to eat and that's not okay to eat. And I had one family who actually put these plant pot sticks around the house and put those in, and the same in the garden. So sometimes just giving our children that extra bit of information can be really helpful. And sometimes, which is what this wooden cutlery picture is about, cutting them some slack, that actually, if they've coped with lots of noises and lots of sensory input over the day, then it's fair enough that maybe the noise of the cutlery on the plates is too much for them. And I know one family that actually managed to have a family meal together because they just changed the cutlery and it changed the whole noise. And I think sometimes it would be wise for us to literally step back and observe what the noises are, what the experiences are around that table for our young children. And then, of course, there's always the famous M meals. And I know one family who kept that little box and wrote my on the M for their little one. And that little box, any food that went in there, for some reason, he would be happy to give it a try. But other food he wasn't so keen on trying. So they use that for introducing new foods. So again, just thinking outside of the box. And then this one here, which, you know, again, personally, shopping with our eyes doesn't appeal to me, but it worked for one family, having some really unusual foods for their children to try on a sharing plate in the middle of the table was just the distraction and the interest that that particular family needed. So I think it's like it's really important that we just think outside the box when we're thinking about supporting our children and their eating, hopefully eating habits, and that we start to sort of unravel some of that sort of social anxiety around autism, and that we talk about the fact that we do need to eat. And, you know, in situations, what situation do we need to eat in? Is this for the nutrition, or is this for a social training that we want them to eat in that particular environment? So I think revisiting our expectations and our intentions is a really wise thing to do as parents as well. And I've given you a few references here about some of the research that I was looking at, and also some websites that have got some really good parent-specific advice and lists on there of things to try and things to have a go at. And also a couple of books here that I've had some great success with. The Autism Friendly Cookbook, I've got that actually to hand here. I'll just pull that down because I actually won this. This is the kind of life I have. These are the sorts of prizes that I get. So I was delighted with this. So it was a competition on PDA many years ago that I was involved in, and I won this fabulous book, and I love it because the recipes are so nicely put out, and they don't only mark out ingredients and what you need, but they talk about what you need to do. And then also this lovely author, Lydia Wilkins, she talks about her experience of that particular meal as well. So that's really, really nice, really user-friendly. And then that sort of what happens when you eat, a real kind of on the nose explanation of our digestive system, because that's the other thing in nutrition and how everything works, and talking about our interoception skills. Do we know if our body needs a wee or why our body needs a poo and how that's made? So, you know, thinking in a very literal and factual sort of way for some children can be really helpful. And then this book I haven't read personally, but I've heard people who have used and found it helpful, helping your child with extreme picky eating. But as I say, you know, think about that little boy and his pasta pot. For our children, think outside the box. There's no norms and there's no benchmarks. Okay, so I'm really happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you, Anne-Marie, for presenting another brilliant webinar. We've had so many questions submitted in the chat box. Our first question is, my daughter is 3 and only has milk. She literally refuses to eat anything, especially lumps, etc. She won't drink anything else either. Do you have any advice?
I think lots of sensory play and lots of opportunities for that whole sort of playing with food, making edible food that we can play in. So using things like corn flour and just giving lots of non-pressured, non-expected opportunities for mouthing and that sort of thing. I'd be interested to talk to that parent a little bit more to know if their child is actually mouthing, which is obviously that sort of stage of development, but it's also a precursor to us managing and using our whole muscle system to eat and to chew our food. So I think my initial reaction in this context, my response would be try and introduce lots of opportunities for sensory play and leaving other things around as well. And maybe, leaving that bottle top off with something else in the bottle might be worth a try as well. So I'm sorry, it's hard, isn't it, always in this situation to give a really good answer, but hopefully that's just a little starting point. And I'm sure you've probably explored things like smoothies and things because, and that's the other thing for our children, sometimes don't try and change what's in the bottle because that can be the risk that we're taking. I will get a new bottle and give a different bottle with something different in it, but leave that particular milk and knowledge and reassurance and consistency, that keenness on, leave that in place. Don't remove that. We don't want to not drink in a milk. And that's always our emotional worry, isn't it?
Oh, thank you, Anne-Marie. Our next question is, my question is in relation to compulsion and overeating. I have to lock food away and they have put weight on. I can't get them to stop eating. Do you have any advice?
I think, as I say, that mum that actually labeled things and made things very clear about who and what belonged to who. And then also at the same time, I know a family who did a calorie counter that actually was on the wall in the kitchen and they coloured in what each food had that day and what their calories were. And then other families who have had, this is today's snacks, if it's snacks that's the issue, in a box. And, once those snacks are gone, that's it. I have had families who have put, infant cupboard locks and things on. And I know it feels extreme, but if that's what helps you get over those initial hurdles, whilst we're putting these other strategies in place as well, that poor mum who literally was keeping food in the boot of her car. But, things moved on and she was the one who then ended up with things in the fridge labeled. And that's no big deal, is it? We can do that. We can make that accommodation. So, just starting with those small changes.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. Our next question is, my son has ARFID and won't go near anyone eating. He just tries to screw his body up or leave the room. We went for a play date at his friend's and his friend went to get a snack out of the cupboard and he bolted for the door. Thankfully, it was locked. We cannot go anywhere where the food might be. He had a meltdown last night because we were paying at a till and somebody came over to collect their food order and he had a meltdown and was screaming laying on the floor. Do you have any advice?
I think definitely contact the ARFID support group. Um, there is an ARFID Awareness UK, and I would really encourage you to talk with them. But actually, they also talk about the kind of 5 areas of ARFID, and they talk about avoidance, restriction, and that aversion. And of course, for your little boy, maybe for a little while, food focused activities or activities that are involving food. Sometimes less is more. My kind of instinct would be to say, let's, try and back off as much as we can at the moment to avoiding those situations. I'm doing some work around the fact that actually just because someone else is getting a snack doesn't mean to say that he has to have that if that is something that's perhaps impacting. But I would definitely point you towards ARFID awareness. There's some fabulous, I've heard a parent talk on ARFID on with the ADHD Foundation, and I think she'd be great to give you some good advice from that website, ARFID Awareness UK.
Oh, that was great, Anne-Marie. Thank you. Our next question is, my son has a compulsive habit of hiding food. It is always sweet snacks, biscuits, crisps, etc. I find wrappers and snacks he is saving for later everywhere, down the side of his bed, side of the sofa, in his bedroom drawers. He does it a lot at bedtime, and I want to understand why. It's causing tooth decay as he isn't brushing well also. Do you have any advice?
I think again, maybe going down the very literal explanation, and maybe he is getting hungry in the night, and maybe that's his worry that he's going to wake up in the night hungry. So whether you could sort of compromise initially and work with him on having a little secret stash, and for our children sometimes even labeling it such and giving them a tin under the bed so they can put that secret stash in there, because it can be about placement, about consistency, about predictability. That's the kind, and worry that I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be hungry. And so I think really trying to find out why he's wanting food at that time, why he's wanting to hide it, or are these disallowed foods during the course of the week or the course of the day? And if that's the case, then I would be sticking that wrapper, the empty wrapper, on the day that he can have that, or making sure that that's available. He knows when that's going to be available so that he doesn't need to sort of sneak it away and have it at a time when he's not cleaned his teeth. And I think talking with him about that being your concern, that that will cause tooth decay, and going through with him in detail as to what that really means.
Oh, that was really helpful, Anne-Marie. Thank you. Our next question is, my son is 9 and has autism and severe sensory issues. Getting him to eat outside of the few food he likes is very difficult. How can I encourage him? And why does he throw food behind the furniture, even food he likes?
That's a good question as well, because of course there's lots of layers to sort of peel back there. And I think the throwing and the hiding is perhaps a different agenda, because it may be he likes the response, the reaction. Maybe if it's not detected, he likes the smell that comes from that. So I think that there's a lot of work to do there. And if he's very sensory driven, then he's obviously getting a lot of sensory feedback and enjoyment from that experience. So I think I would be really looking at how you can replace those opportunities in a more appropriate way. And as regards introducing new foods, if nutritionally is okay, then actually introducing new foods needs to be done in a very non-demanding, playful, not even necessarily meal times situation. So I think a lot of layers, a lot of autism layers there to have a little look at as well. Maybe using, one of the tools we've talked about, and I know on the Witherslack website there are some good tools on what is autism, and there's some advice there on just looking at all those different elements and just taking a step back and trying to think actually what else is going on here.
Oh, sorry about that, Anne-Marie. I couldn't get my
Oh,
mute to turn off.
oh, bless you. Don't worry.
Thank you for answering that one. Our next question is, do you have any ideas about helping them to not eat too much? He takes massive bites and eats super fast and seems to not know when to stop. Do you have any advice?
Sometimes using a knife and fork for finger foods can be helpful in kind of slowing that down. But also, I think sometimes working out who it's a problem for, if we're getting dietary problems because of that speed of eating, or if it's that actually our young person is trying to get away from the table. So, what's happening there? But also, I think, again, it's about really noticing the rest of the environment and what's going on that's causing that sort of almost speed eating. And sometimes cutting food up beforehand, so cutting a sandwich into little shapes and using shape cutters so that you're making that more of a fun activity than, I'm cutting this into small pieces so you don't put as much in your mouth. But actually, if you cut that into, little mini stars or mini bunnies or Easter eggs, whatever's current at the time, then actually that's a more playful way of slowing down eating and slowing down that loading as well. And sometimes our children need those situations that we think everyone just knows. So everyone just knows that actually it's more helpful to empty your mouth before you put the next bit in. But if you think about how toddlers learn to eat, they're used to having food in their mouth all the time. And sometimes those skills, because they are to do with sensory situations, aren't acquired until much later for our children. So helping them on that journey.
Oh, thank you, Anne-Marie. Our next question is, a parent I'm working with's son has always been particular with food, but about 6 months ago, somebody mentioned taste buds changing, and now he uses this to decline foods, including foods he did eat before. She does add a bit of what the rest of the family is eating to his plate at meal times, but it's rare that he tries it. Apart from perseverance and a gentle nudging, what else can she do?
Um, I'm kind of sat here thinking, well, why does she need to change it? Could we not just roll with that for now? And if he's eating a varied diet, does it matter that he's eating different things? So I think sometimes touching base with what we're trying to change and why we're trying to change it, what are our expectations, um, can be helpful. And again, giving some factual information for the young boy. Kay's Anatomy do some great books, and the Kay's Anatomy one is like a really nice user-friendly book that will cover things like exactly that. Do your taste buds really change? And how that impacts. And of course, we know as adults our taste buds do change. And so it's a fair comment. But then finding flavors within that taste group might be a positive way forward.